Hey friends, today I'm going to give you my personal review of the Presto 16 quart pressure canner. Pressure canning is a wonderful way to store the produce from your garden. You grow things in your garden and it's wonderful to eat them when they're fresh, straight out of the garden. But the way gardening works, you will have an overabundance of produce from your garden. It will be more than you can eat. But then later in the season, you will want to have it. So you have to find a way to store your produce so that it can last all year long. Through pressure canning, you can store most produce for 12 to 18 months, sometimes even longer than that. And so I had never pressure canned before until about 2 years ago. I knew I was going to be getting a lot of produce from my garden and I wanted to be able to store it long term. So I began to study and investigate how to pressure can and what kind of equipment I might need and what kind of pressure canner I wanted to buy. It took a lot for me to find that stuff out, and so I wanted to share with you all of the information that I learned through that process so that you can know whether this is a good canner to use. This is a Presto 16 quart canner. So let's look at it and see, is it any good? This Presto 16 quart canner sells for about $126 on Amazon. I bought it 2 years ago and it was on sale, and so I was able to get it for about $100. I think it was just a little bit under $100 when I bought it. And it was highly recommended from some different videos that I saw, as well as the reviews that came on Amazon. However, most people recommended a more expensive canner, and the Presto was one of the alternate options. But the Presto was a much cheaper option, and so I thought that being a first-time canner, I would start off with a cheaper product. I didn't want to spend $200 or $300 on a pressure canner only to find out that I didn't stick with it. So I started with this canner because I figured $100 was worth giving it a try. And I want to tell you that I have overall been pleased with this canner. It's not perfect, but I would definitely buy it again and I would definitely recommend it. So let's take a look at it and see what it comes with and why I like it and maybe some things I don't like. First of all, it is called a 16 quart canner, which is confusing because when I saw that and I bought it, I thought that would mean I could can 16 quarts in one batch, but that's not true. The maximum that you can pressure can in this unit is actually only 7 quarts, or you can 9 pints, or you can 12 half pints. So why do they call it a 16 quart canner if it can only can 7 quarts? I think it's because the inside of the canner will hold 16 quarts of liquid, but not 16 quarts jars, only 7 quart jars, 16 quarts of liquid. Okay? So that's confusing, and I think they should do a better job in marketing it to make that clear. But I'm telling you now, this will only hold 7 quarts. But still, 7 quarts is quite a lot. I think I've only canned a full batch of 7 quarts maybe a couple of times. Usually I'm coming up short. Okay? So that's 7 quarts right there. That's a lot. So that's, maybe 20 pounds of potatoes or 20 pounds of tomatoes. That's a lot. So this will definitely process quite a bit. You can get a larger canner, but for a first-time canner or even really someone like me who does grow quite a bit in my garden, this is plenty. But I just wish they'd make it more clear in the marketing that this can only can 7 quarts. It does say that in the description, but you have to dig a little bit for it. By calling it a 16 quart canner, it's a little bit misleading. One of the things I liked about it is it comes with a pressure gauge, so you can tell right away what the pressure inside the canner is. And that's important because in order for you to safely can your garden vegetables, most of the time, unless you live in a really high elevation, you're going to want to can that at 11 pounds per square inch. And so this gauge will tell you exactly where you are. So that's a very useful tool. One of the great things about this that I like, this canner has a safety valve on it. See right there? That little rubber tab, if the pressure gets too high, it will pop out automatically and it will keep the canner from building up so much pressure that it will explode. So it's very safe. Secondly, it has this little pop-up valve right here. And what this does is it makes it impossible to open the canner. Once a certain amount of pressure and steam builds up inside, this little thing pops up, and that closes, that locks the lid on top of the canner, and you cannot open it at that point. So that's a very useful safety feature as well. And that's two of the things that I really like about this canner, is the safety plug and that locking valve. And also the third thing is I really like this pressure gauge. Fourth, I really liked this canner because it's affordable. I mean, yes, $126 is not cheap, but compared to some of the other higher dollar pressure canners, that's a good bargain. For a good quality canner, I've had it for 2 years and it's been just fine. Haven't had any problems with it. It actually comes with a 12-year warranty, so this thing will last. It has a replaceable rubber seal inside it. So I'm sure that will need to be replaced at some point, but so far it's just working fine. You know, I've used it a good bit every season for a couple of years. Another thing that I like about it is the instruction manual, Cookbook. A lot of people recommend getting the Ball Blue Book. It's supposed to be the Bible for canning people. But this pressure cooker book it's got everything I've needed in it so far. It has clear instructions about all the different kinds of things you might want to can. Beans, potatoes, tomato juice, fruit, berries. It even has recipes for things like spaghetti sauce and salsa, soup and stock. It gives good, clear, easy instructions, and it's just a very simple, quick, easy book. There's probably a lot better books that are out there, but there's a good case to be made for simple instructions in a very easy book. I just keep this book. I store it right there in the canner when I'm not using it with all the other supplies that I need. And there it is. It's right there when I need it. And I refer to it to remind myself, how much salt do I need to put in a pint of tomatoes? How much salt do I need to put in some potatoes? How long do I need to cook them and at what pressure? So, and then of course it has also the basic process of canning. So they did a good job on that book, and I'm very pleased with it. So those are the things that I like about this canner: the safety plug, the locking valve, the pressure gauge, the instruction book, and the price is right for this canner. It comes with one rack. You don't want to put jars directly on the bottom, so they give you this little insert, and that comes in. Now, you can stack jars in 2 levels in here, but in order to do that, you need to have another rack, and it doesn't come with a second rack. So you'd have to buy that separately. It also comes with a 15 psi pressure regulator weight. So what this does is it sets on top of this little steam valve, and as steam pressure builds up inside the canner, let me get this lid on here. But this pressure regulator valve sits on top of the steam vent, and once the pressure inside reaches 15 psi, it's enough pressure to cause this weight to begin to wobble and allow steam to release. So with this weight, it never gets above 15 psi. Now, before I bought this canner, I had never done any canning before, and I thought you would just turn the heat up on your stove until you could get it regulated right where whatever PSI you needed. But that's nearly impossible to do. By just regulating the heat, the pressure is going all over the place. It'll never go past 15 PSI because you've got a 15 PSI weight on it. But almost all recipes call for 11 PSI, at least where I live. If you live at a very high elevation, there's an adjustment that you make, and it changes the PSI. But where I live and where most people live, almost all recipes are going to call for 11 PSI. But the weight is for a 15 PSI. And so I thought, well, why didn't they just give me a weight that regulates it to 11 PSI? And that's one of the things I didn't like about this purchase. I had to go online and I found another weight. And this is a cool weight. I recommend it. It only costs about $15. And what it is, this is 5 PSI. Put another ring on there. And now we're at 10 PSI. Add another weight on there. Now we're at 15 PSI, which is the same as that. So all I have to do, put one ring on it, and that now is 10 PSI, which is actually 11 PSI, because once it gets to 11 PSI, now this is going to start wiggling. It's going to release steam, and that means that this pressure gauge is never going to go above 11 PSI. And so that's all I have to do. It makes it so simple. You don't have to try to regulate the temperature or anything like that. You just got to put the 10 PSI weight on there, and now we're going to get perfect 11 PSI regulation. So I wish it came with a regulator like this instead of like this. Why not just give us this one instead of this one? I mean, it's the same amount of material. Shouldn't be any more expensive, and it would just be more useful. But they didn't. The second thing I don't like that I think they could do better, you'll notice inside there are some lines engraved into the side of the canner. And these are used to tell you how much water needs to fill the canner for different things. So this line down here on the bottom, which you can barely see, this is the 3-quart water line. And for pressure canning most recipes, it requires you to have 3 quarts of water in the canner. And so the idea is you can just fill the canner up until it reaches this line, and then you have 3 quarts in there. Or if you're doing something else, this line or this line. The problem is you can barely see them. You see how hard it is to see them? Well, now, if you've got water in here and it's boiling and steaming, you can't see these lines at all. And the only thing you can do is stick your hand in there and feel for them. But you don't want to do that because it's boiling hot. You'll burn your hand. So it's really hard to use these lines. I usually just use a measuring cup and put in 3 quarts of water. But then, of course, maybe the canner's been boiling for several minutes. Some of the water's boiled out. You don't know if it's at that line anymore. So how do you measure it? It's really hard. I don't know how they would fix that, but I think that they could maybe do something to cause these lines to be dark, where there's a high contrast level so you can see them, even when there's a lot of steam coming up out of the pot. That would be good. I wish they had done that. Maybe they'll do that in a future improved model. One more critique of this particular model, and it's just a small thing. By the way, with all of these things, I'm just saying, this is a really good canner. These are just nitpicky things that could make it better. This safety valve, this lock, a little bit of steam comes out from there, and it sort of pools right here in this little lip. And then sometimes it drips down the side and gets water on the surface of your stove. So, I don't know. It's just a nitpicky thing, but it always bugs me that there's a pool of water right here in this little divot. And I usually get a napkin or something or a paper towel and just sort of soak it up. Maybe that's just my OCD. But I wish that was somehow, it didn't do that. That's my 3 main critiques. But overall, this is an excellent pressure canner. I've used it for 2 years now. I've used it for pressure canning and for water bath canning. It does an excellent job, and I definitely would highly recommend it. Don't be worried that it doesn't cost as much as some of the more high dollar canners. This is a great canner, and it will do you just fine. And I think that you will get many years, probably 10 to 20 years, maybe a lifetime of use out of this canner. So don't worry that it's not as expensive as the other ones. It does an excellent job. Could it be better? Absolutely. We can always make improvements, but I think that this is definitely a good canner. I would highly recommend it. I would buy it again personally myself. Some other things that this canner does not come with that you should buy if you're going to get started with canning. Again, highly recommend this adjustable pressure regulator weight. You want to get one of those to replace the one that it comes with, unless you live at a sea level where 15 psi is what all of your recipes call for. A second thing is a jar lifter. You want one of these in order to pick up hot jars out of the boiling water inside the canner. This is a very handy thing to have. A magnetic lid lifter. When you've got a jar lid like this in a pot of boiling water, this comes in there and you can just pick that right up. Or if you're not picking that up, you could pick up your rings. Anything that's in hot boiling water like that you're using to sterilize, this is a handy thing to have. A pair of tongs can be useful too. Picking up tomatoes out of boiling water or potatoes or something like that, that's handy. But a lot of people have that anyway. A canning funnel is a very valuable resource to have. You don't want to get liquid and sediment all over the rims of your jars because that can affect the ability for the can to seal properly. So one of these, you stick it down on top of your canner, on top of your jar, just like that, and it makes it easy to get things into the jar and also makes it easy to keep the rims from getting dirty. So that's a handy thing to have. A bubble popper, also a useful thing. And this particular one has measurements to sort of show you how much head space you have in your jar. And then another handy thing is the jar wrench. So this, when you've got a hot jar and you're trying to put the lids on it, it can be kind of hard to touch the jar. So this is handy to kind of hold that right there in place so that you can take the rings and lids and tighten them down. You hold with one hand here and you can tighten with the other hand here. And of course, you could always use a towel to hold as well, which works well enough, but this makes it even easier. And of course, if you're doing canning, you got to have jars and you got to have the lids in order to can things up. So those are the main accessories that you should consider getting if you're getting it into canning. I bought all of these. They all came together. All of these things here came together in a pack. I think it was about $15, so not too bad. So all told, with the canning pack, accessories, the pressure regulator, and the canner that was on sale, I think I spent about $130, which is not bad. And I've definitely gotten my use out of it. Jesus said, "The greatest commandment of all is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second greatest commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." The Apostle John said, how can you say that you love God if you don't love your neighbor? You can't even see God, but you see your neighbor, and God loves your neighbor. And if you don't love your neighbor, then how can you say that you really love God? We got to love our neighbors. We got to love God. The two go hand in hand. So let's try to do that. And let's get out there and let's grow and be fruitful.